بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء وخاتم المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين واللعنة الدائمة الباقية على أعدائهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد, brothers and sisters in Iman, Salamun Alaikum. We have been going through a review of Surah at-Talaq, Surah number 65 of the Quran. And as I had mentioned right in the beginning, that Islam basically talks about a comprehensive way of life and doesn't shy away from discussing important issues, especially when we talk about family life. We looked at the first 5 ayat of this surah, and we saw the emphasis that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He talks about the issue of even divorce, which is considered to be the most disliked permission that He has given, as opposed to marriage, which is the most beloved thing in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even while talking about the rulings of talaq, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again and again emphasizes the concept of taqwa, that even in doing that, remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and fear from displeasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To continue that, we looked at the 2 ayats yesterday and the night before, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talked about the concept of taqwa and its implication and tawakkul, that even if you face difficulties, if you have the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and trust on Him, He will find a way out for you from the problems. Ayat number 6 basically goes back to this theme of divorce and actually further repeating some of the rulings which was mentioned earlier. Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَسْكِنُوهُنَّ مِنْ حَيْثُ سَكَنْتُمْ مِنْ وُجْدِكُمْ. After the divorce, and this is, as I had mentioned, this is the divorce where the husband initiates that and divorces the wife. House them where you live, according to your means. This is repeating the statement which was there in the very first ayat of this surah. وَلَا تَضَرُّوهُنَّ لَتُضَيِّقُوا عَلَيْهِنَّ. And do not harass them, and to put them in straits and make it difficult for them. وَإِن كُنَّ أَوْلَادِ حَمْلٍ. And if they are pregnant at the time of divorce, then you have to provide that divorced mother till the childbirth. فَإِنْ أَرْضَعْنَا لَكُمْ فَأْتُوهُنَّ أُجُورَهُنَّ. And if they suckle the baby for you, then you have to give them the ajr, the wages for that, and consult one another fairly regarding the child. And then the ayat ends with the words, وَإِن تَعَاصَرْتُمْ فَتَتُرْضِعْ لَهُ أُخْرَى. We'll come to that later on. Basically, going to the issue of this first 2 lines, where it's again emphasizing the point that even in case of talaq, during the time of the iddah, the husband has to maintain the wife. This is his duty and it's her right. And number 1, you cannot throw her out of your home during that time. And you should basically house them with you according to your own means. It is implied in this ayat that it's not only housing, all other nafaqa and necessities of life, maintenance is to be included in that. And the warning is that وَلَا تَضَرُّوهُنَّ لِتُضَيِّقُوا عَلَيْهِنَّ. Do not harass them. Do not put them in difficulties so that, you actually are forcing them to move out. And then you say, okay, I didn't do it. She decided to leave. And this is where we have to realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looks at the human condition and the challenges that people face, and He doesn't shy away from talking about it very clearly. And this is again in a way repeating the warnings which have come earlier in the first 5 ayat. وَإِن كُنَّ أَوْلَاتِ حَمْلٍ, if they are, pregnant women, then even after reciting the divorce, during the time of the iddah, they should be housed where the husband lives and be provided by the husband till the birth of the child. So there is no issue of 3 months now here. If it's going to be a longer period, it is wajib on the husband to maintain the pregnant, divorced wife till the end of the birth of the child. Now, before I continue, let me ask you this question. Can a wife ask her husband to pay her for feeding her own child? 4 choices there. No, or maybe, or yes, or makruh. Huh? Are you sure about it? The child is born to her. It's her own child. The answer would be C. Why is that? Nafaqa is wajib on the father or the mother? Nafaqa means maintaining and providing for the child. Whose duty is it? It's the father. So if the mother willingly, feeds the child, doesn't ask for anything, that's okay. It's her, out of her own love and grace. But if she turns around and says, I want to be paid for it, as the father, you have to pay that. Although this normally doesn't happen, and this is not the idea here to ask mothers to start asking. The whole idea is the thought behind this. Sometimes you see the rulings are there, but not necessarily that you implement that. But the other side is that, the husbands have to then appreciate and realize that she has a right to ask for the wages of feeding her own child. But if she is doing that, this is out of her own, sense of rahmah and love for the husband, the child, and the family in general. So going back to this ayat number 6. فَإِنْ أَرْضَعْنَا لَكُمْ, and this is a case of a woman who has been divorced, and then she gives birth to a child, and now she is feeding the baby. And this is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, once the child is born, the talaq becomes final. And when it becomes final, now she is divorced in a way finally. But the divorced mother, if she agrees to breastfeed the child, then the husband has to pay her if she demands that. And this is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes further to talk about it, where He says, وَأَتَمِّرُوا بَيْنَكُمْ بِمَعْرُوفٍ, and let there be amicable and friendly communication between the divorced couple on this issue as well as other issues pertaining to the child. And this is where, this is the imtihan. Unfortunately, you hear about cases, there is vengeance, people just want to get back to one another. There is no issue of looking at the child and what is the best for the child. And this is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is emphasizing this point, especially during the first 2 years when the child is to be fed. If there is dispute about it, وَإِن تَعَاصَرْتُمْ, this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, that if you have made things difficult for each other and you have not been able to reach to an amicable understanding on this simple issue of feeding the child, whether it is about the dollar amount or whatever other reason should be, then of course the child has to be fed. And it is the father's responsibility that if mother is not willing to do it, then you find somebody else or some other way of feeding the child. And this is where, again, I would like to go to this issue of what we discussed last night. That we saw that in Surah at-Talaq, which consists of 12 ayat, we discussed the 5 ayat, which is actually size-wise just half of the surah. And if you look at that, we went through the page also on the screen, and I want to see how much you remember from last night. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the term وَمَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهِ in different places in the first 5 ayat of Quran, of Surah at-Talaq. Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the person who fears displeasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, number one, he is going to find makhrajan, find a way out of a way out for him out of his problems. And then, he's going to make things easy for them. And this is where we have to realize that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala emphasizing this point of taqwa again and again in just 5 ayat, talking about talaq, shows that, taqwa is actually the foundation of how we conduct our lives, especially when it comes to interaction within the family itself. Now, how many times does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala use this term exactly? Man yattaqillah in Surah at-Talaq. Was it once? Or 2 times? Or 3 times? Or 4 times? What is the right answer? 3 times. 3 times Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala emphasizes the point of taqwa. And this is where we have to realize that, we being the follower of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Amir al-Mu'mineen is a very famous title of his, but there is another title which is equally famous. And he is Imam al-Muttaqeen. When you talk about this concept of Imam al-Muttaqeen, keep that in mind. Let us try to live by that title, that we are followers of the Imam who is the leader of the Muttaqeen. Verses of Surah at-Talaq deal with the divorce initiated by the husband. Now, if you remember, we talked about the 3 categories of talaq. Which one would apply in the case of Surah at-Talaq? Is it khula, or talaq by mujtahid, or mubarat? It goes with the name, Surah at-Talaq. Khula is when the wife initiates the divorce. Mubarat, when they have tabarra on one another. Okay, they basically don't like, there's mutual dislike. And rulings somehow differ as far as immediate impact of reciting the talaq, or the issue of mahar, where it is applicable, where it is not. The C, talaq by mujtahid, or by somebody authorized by the mujtahid. This is not very common, but it is there in the Shia fiqh. When the person leaves his wife hanging, she is neither married nor divorced. And sometimes, and I don't mean to say men are bad all the time. No, for what I've seen in 30 years, it goes both ways. It is human nature. It's not male or female nature here. But I've seen sometimes this right of talaq given to the man is misused. They go to the court, give the divorce, and then they say, okay, what about the talaq? They said, no, I'll not give you talaq. So legally, according to the civil law, the woman is divorced. But according to Shari'i law, she is not. And the whole purpose is basically to torture her. And Quran uses the word, mu'allaqa, to keep her in suspense. She is neither married nor divorced. And when we talk about it, this is where, we talk about the optional condition in a marriage contract, that you can even see the website of jafri.org. There is a sample there. The reason why we have, highlighted and selected about 4 to 5 situations where the husband gives the right to the wife to do the talaq as his wakil in 1, 2, 3, 4 cases, because we see that this is where some men basically misuse that. And one of the conditions there is that if the husband divorces the wife in the civil court but refuses to give the shar'i talaq, because this is where then they have to go to a mushtahid or a wakil who is authorized to do that, and it's not that easy process. The mushtahid or the wakil has to be convinced that this is a just and a fair situation, and so it becomes really difficult. Let me share with you one example. This is many, many years ago, so nobody need to go to imaginations where and who, but this is in Toronto about 22 years ago. There was a case which was brought to me. This was the time when Ayatollah Gulpaygani marhum was alive. And I looked at the situation. I called up the husband and I said, your wife has come with the application of khula. I would like you to come and see me so we can discuss and see. I would like to listen to your side of the story. And he gave me an answer which I never heard before. He says, Maulana, hold on. And after a few minutes, he comes back on the phone and says, Maulana, istikhara dekha hai, aapse baat karna mana aa raha hai. But I saw the istikhara and it's bad to talk to you. I said, well, he's being very clever here, trying to use, istikhara. I said, okay, but, this is what she's saying in the application. I just wanted to hear from your side. He mentioned a few things and then, the conversation ended. So I sent, those days we didn't have emails, but, fax was there. So I sent the application with my recommendation to late Ayatollah Uzma Gulpaygani, asking him to recite it in Qom. I didn't want to take that burden on myself. And so I got the response back from him saying that if you are satisfied, you go ahead and do it. So then I called this fellow again. I still wanted to give him a chance that if he can come down, we can talk. And if he agrees, it's more, for his own izzat and honor, it's better for him to say yes rather than me doing it as, Hakim Shara's talaq. So I called him up. I said, I have this response from Ayatollah Gulpaygani, and I'm still giving you a chance to come. And he says, when can I come and see you? For a moment, I thought maybe I should say, let me see istikhara with her. I should accommodate you or not. But anyway, people in my position, we have to just swallow. So we had a discussion. So, sometimes people can become very difficult. At least in the Shi'i system, we have this recourse for women in such situation that they can refer to the marja or the mushtahid or the wakil and get this situation resolved. This is very similar to the Jewish laws, actually. There also the right of talaq has been given to the men. And they don't have this mechanism. From the cases that I was just studying on a comparative basis between their laws and our laws and Christian laws, it was interesting to see that, in Israel, because they have now their own government, still the council, the rabbinical council, doesn't have power to pronounce divorce. But if they find a case where they think that the husband is being unfair and unjust, then they use the civil, administration to harass the husband. Next time he goes for renewal of his driver license, he will be denied. He will be told, go and first finalize your divorce before we renew it. There was one case I was reading where a fellow, they even threatened him to send him to jail, and he says, I'll go to jail, but I'm not divorced. So, we have these kinds of, human nature where sometimes they become very vengeful, and this is where, in Islam, at least in the Shi'i fiqh, we have this process of talaq done by the authority of the mushtahid. Let me now go to the fourth scenario here, just extending with the issue of feeding the baby. Is the wife required by the Sharia to do the household chores for the husband and her children? It is wajib on her, or jaiz, or makruh, or better? I'm asking the wrong audience here anyway, so but let's see what is your answer anyway. Huh? Jaiz, okay. The right answer would be D. But it is not wajib. It's not a duty. You are marrying a wife, not a servant. And this is where we have to realize, other than two things, and we can't go into details here, nothing is wajib on a wife vis-a-vis the husband. And so when it comes to the issue of, working at home, shar'an wujub, no. But when we talk about akhlaqi perspective, when we want to maintain rahmah and mawadda, love and mercy within the family, then this becomes a very important element. You look at the example of Bibi Fatima Zahra salawatullah alayha, where she once went to the Prophet with Amir al-Mu'mineen and asked this question, that when it comes to the household chores, what is the guideline that we follow? And this is where Rasulullah, mentioned very simply, he said, anything inside the house, oh Fatima, this is your responsibility. Anything to do with outside the house, Ali, it's your responsibility. And so when we look at this issue, the Prophet basically didn't give that division as a wujub, that this is wajib. This was a general guidelines that he is giving, but it's not that, you cannot cross the lines and help one another. We see, for example, one day Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam going to the house of Bibi Fatima Zahra, and he saw, those days if you wanted to buy flour, you don't just get ready-made in a bag. You have to buy, wheat and grind it, and this is how then you go through the process of baking the bread. And it's hard work. It's not easy. And what Rasulullah saw inside the home, that Ali and Fatima both are helping one another. The Prophet didn't say to Fatima, what is happening? I said Ali is only responsible for outside. You should be doing this on your own. No. The question he asked was, who among the two has been doing this longer than the other? That person should move away. And this is where Ali says, it was Fatima who was doing this from before. I joined her later on. And so then Rasulullah took the place of his daughter Fatima Zahra and started helping Amir al-Mu'mineen in the household chore there. This is where we see that, when we use this ayat in the marriage ceremonies, Rahmah and Mawadda, these are not only poetic words. These are real values we are talking about. And this is where, I think in our South Asian culture, we have lost out on this issue, that we do not appreciate that when it comes to the husband, the contributions of the wife. And this is something which has to be emphasized. And this issue about, ujrat, wages for feeding your own child. A wife has a right to ask that, is just to emphasize this point. It's not something which is to be, implemented in that way. Just to make us realize that, appreciate what your wife is doing as far as her contribution to the betterment of the family life is concerned. Let me end with a story. Perhaps some of you might have heard it before in the marriage ceremonies. There was a time when we were in the old location at Bayview, and one day after the Friday prayers, the officials at the office of the Jamaat, they said, Maulana, there is a lady waiting to see you. I said, okay. After I met the people, then I went to the back and we sat down. And she was a Lebanese Arab, lady with her child there. And I knew the family. And as soon as I sat down after the salam, she says, Sayyidina, I've come to thank you. I says, thank you for what? Because I don't remember doing anything for you. He says, no, something very unusual happened last Friday. I've been married for so many years, and it is my tradition every day when my husband comes home, the first thing I do is I make a tea for him and present it to him. But last Friday, something very unusual happened. When I gave him the tea, he turned around and said, thank you. Never done this before. So I asked him, what happened today? Well, he said, I had gone to a Jummah khutbah, and Sayyid Rizvi was talking about this issue, bashing the Taliban for the attitude, the way they deal with women. And then he even gave a message to us. And so, I thought maybe I should say thank you to you. And now this wife is coming next Friday to me to thank me. And this is what I'm saying. That one thank you, has an impact. It stays in her heart. And this is what we should, the way I would say, you say thank you one time, maybe you will get, masala chai next time. So you have to keep that and appreciating what the women do at home. Many, many mothers are there, wives are there who have done this for years and years. But there have never been appreciation from the side of the male members of the family. And this is something we have to keep in mind, that is part of the values that Islam has taught us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to be among the true followers of the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt alayhimu salatu wassalam.